There's a smell that never left my grandmother's kitchen, even 40 years after she stopped needing to cook this way. Grease in a cold skillet, a little flour dusted over it, water added slow. That's gravy. That's supper. She could feed 4 people out of a cabinet that looked empty to anybody else. She wasn't a chef. She was a widow's daughter in the Blue Ridge, born in 1919, and by the time she was 10, a third of the men in this country didn't have work, and up in the hollers, there wasn't much work to lose to begin with. What they had was a hillside garden, a creek full of crawdads, and a hen that knew when it was her turn. So here's what I want to do today. I want to count down 18 meals, the real ones, the ones that kept people alive, not the postcard versions, and tell you exactly what made them work, and where they'd kill you if you got them wrong. Quick thing before we start, hit subscribe, and down in the comments, tell me the one dish your own family made when money was gone. I read every one of them, and also comment down below if you like any of these so we can make a recipe book for cheap. Okay, let's go. 18. Fried mush. Leftover cornmeal mush, poured into a loaf pan the night before and left to set up cold and firm. In the morning, you sliced it thin and fried the slices hard in grease until the outside went crisp and the inside stayed soft. A little sorghum on top if there was any left in the jug. It turned yesterday's supper into today's breakfast, and nothing in the pan ever went to the hogs. 17. Onion and potato skillet. Thin sliced potatoes, a whole onion, salted before they hit the grease instead of after. That's the part people skip now, and it's the part that matters, because the salt pulls moisture out early and lets the bottom actually brown instead of steam. You don't touch the pan. You don't stir it out of impatience. You let it sit until it's earned its crust. 16. Poke salad. Every hillside had poke growing wild along the fence line, and every grandmother knew the rule that kept it from being poison instead of dinner. Boil it, pour off that water, boil it again in fresh water, and only then fry it up with a little grease and an egg scrambled through. Skip the double boil and you're not eating a vegetable, you're eating a mistake. This is one of the oldest tricks on this whole list, and one of the most dangerous to get wrong. 15. Tomato gravy on biscuits. No meat in it. The flour browned slow in hot grease until it smelled toasted. Then a jar of last summer's canned tomatoes went in, juice and all, and it thickened into something red and a little sharp. Walk away from that skillet for even a minute while the flour's browning and it turns bitter on you. It doesn't forgive. 14. Graveyard stew. That's what the old lunch counters called plain milk toast. Torn bread, hot milk poured over, a little butter. It sounds like nothing, and it was exactly what you fed a child too sick to chew anything else, or a house with nothing else in it. Warm and full gets a body through the night either way. 13. The wish sandwich. 2 slices of bread, and you wished there was something between them. Some nights there was a raw onion and a scrape of drippings. It wasn't a noble thing. It was hunger wearing a joke for a name. 12. Salmon patties. Canned salmon ran about a nickel a tin in those years, because the government had pushed the price down on purpose, and the whole can went in, bones mashed right through with a fork, along with a cracker crumbled up and 1 egg to hold it together. Fried in grease till the outside crisped. Nobody in that kitchen knew the word calcium. They just knew the families who ate fish once a week didn't get sick the way families who lived on nothing but corn did. 11. Cabbage and corn pone. A head of cabbage kept in a root cellar for months and cost almost nothing. Cut it in wedges, cook it down slow with a spoon of fat until it went soft and sweet, and don't you dare pour off what's left in the bottom of that pot. That liquor is where half the goodness went, and cornbread crumbled into it turned into a second meal entirely. 10. Sorghum and a cold biscuit. When there was no money for white sugar, there was the sorghum jug from the family's own cane press. Split a cold biscuit, pour the dark syrup in, and that was breakfast for a lot of children, and lunch in a coal miner's bucket besides, because it didn't spoil, and it gave a man something to burn through a long shift underground. 9. Egg gravy. Not the same as tomato gravy. A different trick entirely. When the hens were laying, 2 or 3 eggs got beaten into a pan of milk gravy right at the end. and stirred hard and fast, so they set into ribbons instead of clumping into scrambled eggs floating in milk. Done right, it looks like a family that had plenty. It didn't. 8. Crackling cornbread. Hog-killing time rendered out the lard, and what was left in the bottom of that kettle, little crisp bits of skin and meat called cracklings, went straight into the cornmeal batter while they were still warm. Let them go cold first and they won't fold into the batter right. One hog gave a family bread that tasted like it had meat in it for weeks, because it did. 7. Baked sweet potato in the ashes, the simplest meal on this whole list. Bury a sweet potato in the hot ash at the edge of the hearth, not the flame itself, the ash, and leave it an hour. The potato's own starch turns to sugar right there in the coals. No pot, no water, nothing but a fire that was already burning to heat the house anyway. 6. Squirrel and dumplings. When the smokehouse was bare, the woods weren't. Squirrel first, because there were always squirrels, then rabbit. Here's where I have to stop the countdown and give you the modern warning the old-timers didn't have. Wild rabbit and groundhog can carry a bacterial illness you can catch just from field dressing the animal with a cut on your hand, so wear gloves. And any wild game needs to be cooked all the way through to 165 degrees Fahrenheit, not just mostly done. There's a parasite in wild pork and bear that cold weather doesn't reliably kill. They lost people to this without knowing why. We don't have that excuse anymore. 5. Cornmeal dumplings in pot liquor. Whatever broth was left after boiling a pot of beans or greens wasn't thrown out. It was the best part. Cornmeal, salt, and hot water worked into stiff little balls and dropped into that simmering liquor until they cooked through. Drop them into water that isn't at a full rolling boil, and they dissolve into mush instead of holding together. It sounds like the poorest supper on the stove, and it may have been one of the healthiest, because everything the greens gave up into that broth went straight into those dumplings. 4. Stewed rhubarb, the first tart, fresh thing of the whole year, growing wild by the back step before anything else in the garden had come up. Cut the red stalks only the stalk. The leaves carry an acid that binds up calcium in the body, and has killed people who didn't know better. A grandmother who couldn't have told you the chemistry still knew the rule. Cut the leaf off in the garden and leave it lay. 3. Potato soup, the stretch made plain. A few potatoes, an onion, water, milk if the week had been good to you. Mash some of the potatoes right into the broth instead of leaving them whole, and thin water becomes thick soup. That's the whole trick, knowing which potatoes to mash and which to leave, when the arithmetic of feeding 6 people wasn't going to work out any other way. 2. Sugar bread. A slice of bread, buttered if there was butter, greased if there wasn't, and a spoon of sugar pressed in. That was the whole dessert. That was cake, as far as a child in 1933 was concerned. The recipe isn't in the sugar. It's in the woman who had almost nothing and used it to make a child feel like he'd been given something. 1. Chicken and dumplings, the one meal that used the entire skill at once. A laying hen only went in the pot once she'd stopped laying, and an old bird is tough, so you never fried her. You stewed her low for half a day until the meat gave up the bone on its own. That broth was the real treasure. The dumplings, rolled thin from flour and a little of that broth, were what actually stretched one old hen far enough to sit 9 people down at a full table. Rush it, boil it hard and fast, and the meat turns to rubber and stays there. The whole dish is built on patience nobody had time to spare, and made anyway. None of this was ever really about the recipes. It was arithmetic, done by women who could look into an empty pantry and see a meal sitting there anyway. So here's what I'd ask you to do. Bake 1 sweet potato in a bed of ash this week, or beat 2 eggs into a pan of gravy, and watch how far they go. And then come back down to the comments and tell me, what did your people eat when there was nothing to eat? What holler? What county? What was it called in your house? I want to hear it.